On today's show, break down what became a close-fought loss for the Hawks in Toronto, losing to the Raptors by a 10-point final margin that was probably closer than that at the end. The Hawks had chances. The starters were actually quite good in this game, from Trae Young to Kevin Huerter, Clint Capela, etc. But the bench was, let's just say, quite bad in this one. We'll pick apart all of what transpired in this game, how it impacts the Hawks in the future and the present, and much, much more coming up.
You are Locked On Hawks, your daily Atlanta Hawks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, friends. Welcome to episode 1211 of the Locked On Hawks podcast. I am your host, Brad Rowland, coming to you on a Tuesday evening into Wednesday. And today's podcast is brought to you by PrizePicks. Check out PrizePicks.com. Use the promo code NBA or go to the App Store, download the app right now today. PrizePicks is daily fantasy made easy. And thank you, as always, for joining us on the podcast today and making us your first listen each and every day. Check us out on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. And we are part of Locked On Sports Atlanta. Today's show, we'll get into what became a 118-108 loss for the Hawks in Toronto. A close-fought game throughout. It was nip and tuck. The Hawks led early. They led late. They had nice runs across the board. They had a chance to win 6 games in a row, but not quite enough at the end. And with this loss, the Hawks are now locked into play-in officially. No surprise there. That was always going to be their projected destination for the last couple of weeks. But now, no chance mathematically to get out of the into the top 6 at this point. And the Hawks did lead at times. They actually almost pulled off a pretty valiant comeback. They were down by 12 in the fourth quarter, down by 10 with 7.5 minutes to go. Came all the way back to tie the game and briefly take a lead down the stretch, but then it was all Raptors from there. And ultimately, they lost by 10 points, despite the game being much closer than that for the most part. So we'll get into all of what transpired in this game. It's certainly a loss that is not the worst loss for the Hawks, but certainly a pivotal game as well, as Raptors have had the Hawks number this year. They're now 3-1 against Atlanta this season. So just 1-3 against Toronto. Kind of a, I guess, not necessarily scary for the future, but if they were to meet the Raptors, it's been a problematic matchup at times for the Hawks this season. One bright spot before we dive into the game itself is that Trae Young is actually the Eastern Conference Player of the Week for last week. The Hawks were, of course, 4-0 on the way to their 5-game winning streak, and Trae averaged 30 and 11. It's the first time since Dominique Wilkins, the Hawks player has won Player of the Week in the NBA, in the Eastern Conference, I should say, 3 times in a single season. And basically, it's Dominique and Trae in their own tier in terms of Atlanta Hawks history. Obviously, Bob Pettit before that, but those two guys are certainly in their own tier right now in terms of superstardom as members of the Hawks, and fitting that he would tie Dominique with something like that with a fantastic week at the office for Trae a week ago. As for this game, the Hawks actually were facing a Raptors team that was red hot. They had won 5 of the last 6, now 6 of the last 7 for Toronto overall. And the Hawks, of course, have been pretty bad on the road this year, 15-24 now with this loss away from State Farm Arena. So not exactly the greatest setup in the world for Atlanta. Making the matchup a little bit easier was OG Anunoby missed this game for Toronto, one of their best 3 or 4 players. He's been out for a little while, but he was actually questionable coming in, missed this game. But the Hawks, of course, have injuries of their own. John Collins remains out for Atlanta. Gallinari missed this game. He was questionable with left knee inflammation, ended up not being able to go. And then Bogdanovich was questionable, ended up playing. And he was really the only guy on the bench that played reasonably well. I guess him and Delano Wright played okay. But kind of a weird spot for Atlanta as a result of all of that stuff put into one mixture on the road, etc. The Hawks were 4-point underdogs, according to BetOnline. And BetOnline is, of course, the sponsor of this podcast, but also a good indication that the Hawks were not, quote-unquote, supposed to win this one. They were certainly capable of winning this one, but it's not a game that was like an embarrassing loss or anything like that, which is important context to weed through. So as for the game itself, the Hawks did play well at the outset, scoring 3 possessions in a row to begin the game. So quite a ball movement to start. The Hawks had 7 assists in about 5 minutes to open this game. They were actually losing, though, because defensively there were some issues. They had 5 fouls in about the first 5.5 minutes of this one. They threw a lot at Van Vliet defensively. Fred Van Vliet was really bad in this game. So the very, very end, he made one big shot. And of course, it was at the end of the game. It's kind of probably the biggest shot of the game, to be honest with you. But alas, the Hawks were down 5 early, but then erased that with an 11-0 run on 6 possessions. They were really kind of cooking at that point. And Toronto could not buy a 3 early on. Trae had 9 points in the first 9 minutes, had 5 assists. He was really playing quite well at the outset. Rotationally in this game, the Hawks used 10 guys. Not a huge surprise, but Jaylen Johnson returned to the rotation for the first time that he suffered a concussion. And only played in the first half, though. That's notable. Nate did trim it down to 9 in this game after halftime, but Jaylen did play in the first half. It was Bogdanovich, it was Wright, Okongwu, Jaylen, and then Lou Williams as a backup point guard who did not play pretty well either. They had a tough possession late in the first quarter. It was a little bit scary because Trae Young went down awkwardly, kind of did a split. And given his groin issue that's been bothering him recently, that was kind of a scary moment. He ended up being fine. But even after that, it was a live ball turnover, and then Hunter committed a foul that was his second foul in the first quarter and also a clear path foul. So pretty much a disaster possession in some respects on the stretch of the first quarter. But then it was a preposterous one-legged three by Bogdanovic at the end of the first quarter to give the Hawks a quick bucket late, and they went up by 4 at the end of the first period. 11 assists and 1 turnover in the first quarter, which is, of course, excellent, but no free throw attempts. Kind of a weirdly low free throw attempt game for the Hawks to kind of offset some of their other gains elsewhere. And the Raptors couldn't make a shot on the perimeter, which gave the Hawks the edge at the outset. In the second quarter, though, it was not quite as friendly. In fact, that was their worst quarter of the night statistically. And a lot of that was that they used this full bench unit. So if you're a new listener to the podcast, you may not know this, but I am not a big fan of the Hawks using a full bench group. On the one hand, you could argue that with Bogdanovic on the bench, it's not really a quote-unquote full bench unit because he's actually a starting caliber player, obviously. That's worth pointing out, and it's not an unreasonable point by any means, but there's no rule that the Hawks have to do this, and they keep doing it anyway, and sometimes it has bad results. Obviously, it's worth pointing out in my sort of arguing against myself that against Brooklyn, the Hawks played very well with the bench. So it wasn't like this is always going to be the case, but they were very, very bad with Trae and Capela off the floor in this game. And that started out with a 14-6 run by the Raptors in the second quarter. It was nice, tipped up by Delano Wright, but no other positives really from that stretch. And on the glass, it was a disaster. If there was one thing to remember from this game and kind of take away from this contest overall, besides maybe the bench overall, was the fact that they could not rebound the ball with Capela off the floor. Defensively, they just could not get it. And really, the Raptors didn't shoot well at all in this game. And they still were able to overcome that and score efficiently because they just kept getting every rebound on the offensive glass. Hunter was the first starter to come back from Jaylen Johnson. I don't think Jaylen played very well. We'll talk about that later on. But he was the first guy to come out and also did not come back in. Probably his toughest matchup, to be fair, since he started guarding rotation time. He's been playing against some bad teams, and this is one where the Raptors are a little bit more set up to play him differently than other teams are. But Toronto went up 7 points before Trae and Capela came back in. They were minus 11 in that first stretch without Trae and Clint. That's very, very bad, of course. It is worth noting that Toronto is number 2 in the NBA in offensive rebound rate. So that it was sort of a given that they were going to be able to do that. So that's sort of a game plan fail in my mind. You could certainly say that the Hawks don't have the greatest personnel on the glass. I would say that all the time. And I have been saying that for quite a while now, but still, it was definitely a flaw that they were not able to cover up in this one. But here's a crazy stat for you. The Raptors at one point were 0 of 11 from 3 and leading by 7 points before halftime, which is tough to do in the NBA. The Hawks did have a nice run late in the second quarter with an 8-0 run to go take the lead briefly. Huerter was very good in this one, including a hot start. He had 12 points in about the first 15 minutes that he played. In this one, he had 5 points in a row. Toronto got back within, actually made a 3 late finally. The first 3 of the night, it was actually a Thad Young step back, which is funny because they were very cold. It was probably one of their worst shots of the night, but he made it. And the Hawks were down by 4 at halftime. Some good stuff on offense, honestly, in the first half. They had 16 assists and 2 turnovers. They shot well from 2, but they were pretty bad from 3, 7 of 22, and 2 free throw attempts in the half. That is very, very low for the Hawks. Might have been a season low. I forgot to check that, but alas, it was very, very paltry in terms of getting the line and generating that kind of boosted efficiency. Defensively, it was not very good overall. They were pretty good with Clint on the floor, pretty bad with him off the floor. And this was a theme all night, but the Raptors had 15 second chance points before halftime. And only 9 assists and 1 of 13 from 3, but the Hawks were losing even with all that going in their favor. Before we dive into the second half of this one, it was certainly a back and forth kind of half. In fact, the Hawks lost the second half, but not in lopsided fashion, but the damage was kind of done in some respects. Before we get into all of that, though, a word from our sponsors on the podcast today, and the first of which is PrizePicks. NBA fans, if you're looking for a new daily fantasy option, you can check out the award-winning app at PrizePicks. PrizePicks' daily fantasy is made easy. I love it, and I know that you will too. It's so easy to use. All you do is pick 2 to 5 players and an over-under on their projections. Win up to 10 times on any entry. Just you against the projected numbers, and an entire entry can be made in just a minute or less. It's very easy and very brisk in terms of how much time you have to spend on PrizePicks. PrizePicks is also safe, and they offer fast withdrawals. They have props on almost anything you can think of, including points, rebounds, assists, even steals on the basketball side. They also have mixed sports entries if you're into MMA or soccer or even baseball. Pair that stuff together, use those skills to your benefit. And for a limited time, PrizePicks has an exclusive offer for all of our users and all our listeners, and that's an absolute no-brainer as a result. $50 for free if a player in your first PrizePicks entry scores even a single point if you use the promo code NBA. That's right. It's an exclusive offer for locked-on fans and listeners. Sign up today. Use the promo code NBA. $50 for free if a player in your first entry scores even a single point. Check it all out at PrizePicks. Today's show is also sponsored by folks at BetOnline, and BetOnline is fantastic. And the Masters is coming this week. I know in the Southeast, it's a huge deal with a ton of national interest and even international interest as well. I love the Masters. As someone who grew up in Georgia, it's definitely a big deal here. It has been my entire life. And with that in mind, BetOnline.net is the number one source for all of your sports betting needs and your sports information this season and this year, and really for a long time now. And for latest odds, contests, futures, player props, exotics, and much more, BetOnline remains the best spot for all the latest developments in sports, including podcasts and reviews for all of the leagues this season. Of course, that's not just golf or basketball either. They have all kinds of stuff on your sports wagering information and every need they could possibly have, including live betting and your favorite casino games. And BetOnline has odds of other sports like baseball, tennis, auto racing, horse racing, hockey, MMA, boxing, soccer, cricket, entertainment bets, and much more. It's also a great time to look at the futures market because baseball's getting started this week, and in the NBA, the playoffs are approaching. So look ahead to the future stuff and the big picture long shots that are beckoning at this time of the calendar. Head to the website right now, betonline.net, or use it on your computer, or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and the action across the sports world. BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, we'll dive in now to the second half of this game, the third quarter in particular. Both teams were really good on offense early in the third with the starters. The Hawks had 18 points in the first 5 minutes of the third quarter. There was an obscene pass by Trae Young to TLC for a layup early in the second half. Hunter had a good drive where he sort of used his size to shield off the defender and finish aggressively at the rim. There was a good play from him. Huerter was making shots. Siakam on the other end of the floor was tearing up anybody in front of him, whether it was TLC, whether it was Hunter, Jaylen Johnson at one point. Nobody could guard Siakam in this game, and that was certainly a problem at times for the Hawks defensively. It wasn't like a huge spurt or anything. The Raptors got sort of chipped away, and went up by 6 midway through the quarter. Huerter had another 3, though. He had actually 18 points on his first 11 shots. He was very, very hot. And then Hunter got his 4th foul with 3 minutes to go in the third quarter. That they had just taken TLC out. He had to come back in with his own 4 fouls. There were all kinds of foul issues on the forward spot from the Hawks. In this game, Toronto then scored 6 points in a row to go up by 9, and that was a large lead of the night at that point. In fact, it could have been worse. Siakam missed 2 free throws that could have made it 11. And Toronto was really bad at the line in this game. Again, it's kind of crazy when you look at the numbers. We'll come back to this, but the Raptors, even with a flourish late, shot 68% from the free throw line in this game and 9 of 35 from 3 and still won, which is just hard to do against a good offensive team in the Hawks. The Hawks, in fact, in their first 34 minutes of this game, the Hawks had 4 free throw attempts and Trae Young had 0. That is a bizarrely low total for everyone across the board. They had more late, but still well below their normal average. And then even the one that Trae got fouled on was actually on the floor, just happened to be in the bonus. So, not a whole lot going on there. Trae then scored late to cut the lead down to 6 for the Raptors. Trae played the entire third quarter, which was certainly something to keep an eye on because he had to sit for some point. But he had 20 points, 13 assists for 3 quarters. The offense was actually quite good in the third quarter. The Hawks scored 31 points. They had 9 assists in the third, 57% from the floor. They were cooking on offense, but they just could not get any stops. Toronto had no turnovers in the third quarter and 5 offensive rebounds in that period. And then in the fourth quarter, the Hawks got the doors blown off of them early again with Trae on the bench. That's very familiar. It was not just Trae, it was Capela as well, but a 10-4 run by the Raptors. Chris Boucher, who was not great in this one, but actually hit back-to-back threes for Toronto to give them some more cushion. They brought Capela back in a lot earlier than usual. I thought Okongwu was pretty bad in this game, in addition to Capela being good. That was a huge gap in this one. And they brought Trae back earlier than usual as well. He sat for about 3.5 minutes, which is not as much as he usually would sit in that spot. I think Nate knew that they had to get him back in the game quickly, but they were minus 15. Yes, minus 15 with Trae on the bench in this game. They were plus 5 when he played, 15 when he was off in 10 minutes, and that's how you lose a game in the NBA. And they were down by 10 when he came back in. Huerter, Bogdanovic hit a couple of threes. Capela had a great read at the rim defensively to block a shot and force a shot clock violation. And really, aside from a missed bunny by Capela right after that, which actually was answered by Thad Young there on the floor, a lot went well in that stretch. It was actually an 11-0 run by the Hawks to go from down 10 when Trae came back in to up by 1. Trae scored 6 points in a row. He did miss a free throw with about 3 minutes to go. That ended up being at least notable and somewhat important, even though the final score was more than you would expect for a close-fought game. But Nate then called back-to-back timeouts with about 3 minutes to go. You kind of rarely see that. It was a double use it or lose it, if you are not familiar with that. Timeouts just kind of go away in the NBA if you don't use them at a certain point. And that's what happened in this game. And I think because Trae and Capela had to come back in earlier than usual, Nate was trying to give those guys some extra rest. People were kind of mad about that, so that they sort of cost themselves momentum. I'm skeptical of that. I don't think that was really the problem. And I think it made a lot of sense to use those because they had them to use with no penalty whatsoever. But you can argue that all day long. And I totally get that on both sides. But the Raptors couldn't score. I mean, it was kind of remarkable given how good they were on offense the entire game, efficiency-wise. They didn't score for more than 5 full minutes. They missed 9 straight shots. Van Vliet just could not buy one for Toronto. They finally stopped that at the line with Achua. And not to go down the rabbit hole too much here, Precious Achua offensively is just so bad. It's kind of a maddening. And this is actually something we talked about a little bit back in the Rising Stars debate when Congo didn't make it. Achua is a really good defensive player. He flies around. He's very versatile. But he, I believe, has a 50% true shooting for the season. He basically plays center, which is that tells you that's really, really bad. He was 4-11 in this game, just took a bunch of shots that were bad. Anyway, the Hawks finally give up a point there, but they didn't have a field goal for like 6 minutes. Just kind of a crazy run. The Hawks went empty a couple. Bogdanovic was actually pretty good in this game, but missed a couple jump shots that he probably want back late in this one. Achua then missed another 3 that was so badly missed that actually went right to Scotty Barnes on an air ball for a layup. Pretty unlucky for the Hawks in that spot. Back and forth, and then after Bogdanovic missed a pretty good look after offensive rebound by Capela. It was actually a great rebound by Capela. People were upset about Clint not taking the layup. I don't mind it when Bogdanovic is open for 3, and he was, and that's a great shooter that makes that shot a lot of the time. So I had no issue with that whatsoever. I guess you would certainly take the free 2 points, but I don't really mind Bogey from 3 ever when he's open. He just missed it. And then Van Vliet again, he was so bad. He was 3 of 20 in this game. He's pretty, I think he's hurt as well, but 3 of 20 from the floor and 1 of 11 from 3. And of course he makes the one shot that he makes the entire night, basically, at the end to give the Raptors a 5-point lead. That was a big shot of the game overall. It wasn't over, but after the timeout, Trae took a quick 3. Not my favorite shot from Trae. He has license to do that, and obviously he makes that shot more often than a lot of people would. But I didn't love that possession. The Hawks did try to press up from there. It didn't foul, but Siakam scored, and without going down the rabbit hole too much, they never really got back into the game. They were down by 5-7 or more the entire rest of the way. And then once Trae turned it over, down 6 or 7, it was kind of over at that point in time. So they had basically 2 chances. There was the Van Vliet shot that went in after Bogey missed one. That was a big swing in the game, obviously. And then when Trae missed that quick 3, they were pretty much digging uphill at that stage. And then we're not able to overcome all of what transpired in the last 30 seconds or so. Okay. With all that said, there are some observations that I want to pass along about this contest. Offensively, it wasn't horrific from the Hawks by any stretch. They were not great offensively in this game. They had about a 112 offensive rating. That's actually above the league average, but it's below the Hawks average, which is worth noting. Toronto's a pretty good defensive team, but the Hawks just did not have their usual supporting stuff. So when the stars were out there, obviously the Hawks did very well on offense and defense, really, but certainly on offense with Trae on the floor. And they shot the ball pretty well from the floor. 46% from the floor, 38% from 3. That's not like incredible numbers from the Hawks, but certainly good enough. But the free throw line did not help them at all in this game. 12 attempts is well below their average, and only 8 of 12 at the line. That's also below their average. They have 31 assists and 7 turnovers, which is a heck of a ratio. The Hawks continue to have a massive assist turnover split this year. They are number 1 in the league in turnovers still, and they're certainly creeping up in assists. Obviously, almost 5-1, 4.5-1 ratio is pretty crazy good. But it was the supporting stuff that just did not happen for the Hawks. Free throw attempts in this spot were notable, and because of all of that stuff, and we'll touch on the rebounds in a second, the Hawks ended up taking 7 less shots than the Raptors did from the field, and 19 fewer free throws. That is a very bad ratio. Obviously, just do the simple math on this one. Take a step back from all the advanced stuff that I sometimes talk about. If you take 7 fewer shots than your opponent and 19 fewer free throws than your opponent, you're going to lose more often than not. That's just kind of the math of it. You have to shoot the ball so incredibly well to overcome that, and the Hawks just didn't have quite that juice on offense in this one. Defensively, it was very rough overall. I think it was pretty much fine to good when Clint Capela was on there, and then when he wasn't, they got killed, essentially. But overall, a 120 defensive rating. That speaks for itself. That's very bad. The Raptors only had 51% true shooting in the game. They did not shoot the ball well. Even at the line, they weren't good. 68% from the free throw line. But because of the supporting stuff and the offensive rebounds in particular, that kind of sunk them. The Raptors rebounded almost 40% of their own misses. They had 20 offensive rebounds on 57 missed shots. That is extremely bad. And it wasn't just like, it was kind of everybody. It was Scotty Barnes had 6. Trae Young had 5. Chris Boucher had 3. They just kind of had offensive rebounds over and over and over again. And that really, really killed the Hawks. If you're trying to find one thing that was the problem in this game for Atlanta, it was the defensive glass. Very, very certainly. 24 second chance points is an elite figure from the Raptors. That'd be a number 1 in the league kind of number. And 20 points in the paint advantage for the Raptors, 62-42. Turnover-wise, also only 8 from the Raptors in this game. And at the end of the day, Toronto wins this game despite shooting 26% from 3, 68% from the free throw line, and only having 20 assists. That's not good offense for the most part. But when you get every rebound, that ends up swinging the math in your favor. And I think if you watch this game live, even without the stat sheet, you would have felt that coming for the Hawks. They just could not close possessions, especially when Clint was off the floor, and ended up biting them in this game. We'll have much more on this contest with some player evaluations and observations in a moment, as well as a look at the standings and a look ahead to a back-to-back for the Hawks on Wednesday. Before we get to all of that, though, a word from our sponsors on the podcast. The auto world has so many makes and models these days, it's basically impossible for your local chain store to stock all the car or truck parts that you could possibly need or want. And even if they had them, do you actually want to endure the question from the person behind the counter? They just want to sell you the brand they actually happen to carry in the warehouse, something that's actually easier for them. Instead of doing all of that, you have access to rockauto.com at home or in your pocket, and that is a much, much better option. Why spend more for the same parts from a chain store or dealership when you actually order them at rockauto.com for much, much cheaper? And rockauto.com is family business, serving customers more than 20 years. They have reliable low prices for each and every customer, and rockauto.com is the total package. They have absolutely everything you could possibly need for your car or your truck. That includes brake parts and tail lamps, motor oil, even carpet for your vehicle. Check out the website right now at rockauto.com today. See all the parts available for your car or your truck. When you actually get there, write Locked On in the box that asks you how you heard about rockauto.com, because that actually helps us, and they know that we sent you to them. Amazing selection, reliable low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. rockauto.com. All right, we'll dive into the player evaluations now for Atlanta, and a lot of mixed bag stuff overall. We'll start with the negative, and that was most of the bench. Delano Wright, I thought, was fine in a Delano Wright way. 3 points, 3 assists, 4 rebounds. Did have one badly missed three-pointer, but got to the free throw line at least for two attempts. Did have 4 rebounds, including I think he was probably the third best rebounder for the Hawks in this game on a per possession basis. He wasn't fantastic. This is probably a below average Delano Wright game, but he was also one of the better guys on the bench in this one. Jaylen Johnson, 6 minutes, no rebounds, no assists, no points, 0-2 from the floor. 0-1 from 3. Just kind of a non-factor. It wasn't like he was just actively terrible, just didn't really give him anything in this game. On paper, it's a decent matchup for him because he needed to sort of use his burst athletically, but a tough one because Toronto was just pretty good. And also Jaylen just was a little bit passive when he was out there. I don't think he was terrible, but he certainly did not give them what he gave them in previous matchups. It was, of course, his first game back after the concussion. How about Okongwu? Really struggled. No points in 16 minutes, 0-2 from the floor, 2 rebounds. Did have a steal and a block. It was at least active defensively at times, but rebounding-wise, it's not all on him. I want to stress that. It's not all on him, but he's a negative on the glass as a center. And I think just offensively, he didn't really do much of anything. I love Okongwu. I think the future is very bright. That's why I teamed it on Twitter. Was just like, look, he'll have good nights in the future. This is not one of them. He played very poorly, I thought, in this game, and that definitely hurt them. Lou Williams also was pretty bad. 2 points on 4 shots in 11 minutes. Did have 2 assists, but defensively was a big minus. And when he and Okongwu were on the floor, they were minus 15. There you go. People are asking me this. I've talked about it a little bit at times. I personally don't believe that Lou should be in rotation. It doesn't enrage me when he plays the way that it does for some. I think I do understand it on some level, but if it was me right now in kind of crunch time of the season, especially in this game in Toronto or later in the week against Miami when you're playing a really good team, I would be playing Delano Wright as a backup point guard. I think that Lou has had some moments this year, but for the most part has not been good. And I think not playing him is the right decision. Again, I think it's defensible to try to play him at times when Trae's off the floor. Those guys should never play together, almost ever for me. But for me, I would probably cut it down to 8 or 9 guys now and just play Delon without Trae, and then just put Bogey and or Huerter with Wright at all times. That's what I would do. Alas. Lastly, on the bench, Bogdanovich played pretty well. 19 points, 9 rebounds. He was number 2 on the team in rebounds by a lot. 3 assists. Did miss a couple jump shots late, but was 5-12 from 3. I like when Bogey's heaving threes. That's a good idea generally for him, and he ended up being reasonably efficient on those overall. He was the only guy on the bench that really did much of anything. And like I said before, calling him a bench player is kind of not fair because he's really a starter, obviously, and the Hawks know that. He played starter minutes in this game, etc. But they like him in that role, and he sort of anchors that group. I still think that it's not a good idea to play those guys together, and they did it. To be fair, in the second half, they didn't really do that all the way, at least. So there was a small change in the rotational pattern. To the starters, TLC was sort of the bridge guy. He had 7 points, 2 rebounds, and 2 assists. He did not do well against Siakam at times, which is not a huge surprise. But I thought he played reasonably well. Other than that, obviously he's their worst starter. No secrets there. And they used Bogey as the closing guy, which is the right thing to do. But I thought TLC was generally fine. Hunter didn't have much success against Siakam either. And really, it's kind of the same thing as Durant. Like, what are you going to do? As we talked about Glenn Willis, by the way. If you missed the podcast on Sunday, talked for about an hour with Glenn Willis. That was a fun conversation about the Nets game and some other sort of analysis kind of points about the Hawks. But we'll leave that there for now. Elsewhere, Huerter was really good, I thought. 21 points on 13 shot attempts at 5 threes. He was aggressive. He had four assists, had a steal, had a block. I thought he was one of the general positives, was playing good defense in this game as well. I thought he was kind of flying around. He did not rebound. He doesn't really rebound for the most part, which we can sort of get away with it too. It is worth pointing out as a small factor in rebounding issues that Trae and Huerter as a backcourt pairing does not really give you much on the glass, but I thought Huerter was quite good overall in this game. So if you're trying to like sort of rank the guys who played well, I think it was Trae number 1, followed by Capela, and I think I'd probably go to Huerter number 3, and then maybe Hunter had some moments as well. But those 3 guys, I think Trae, Huerter, and Capela were the best 3 players in this game. Speaking of Hunter, 20 points, 6 rebounds. That probably overstates how well he played. I don't think he was quite as good as those numbers indicate, but he was okay. He was 8 of 15 on 2s, 0 of 2 on 3s. They're not too efficient, but was okay-ish. Did have some nice moments attacking the rim. Defensively, he did the best job on Siakam, but it was kind of a low bar to clear in this spot. I thought he was pretty okay. Just wasn't fantastic. I think 20 points overstates it a little bit in 37 minutes. And then Trae Young, obviously, was fantastic. 26 points, 15 assists, 3 turnovers. You love that ratio from him. He was 7 of 15 on 2s, which is totally fine for him. 3 of 8 on 3s. Had the one missed free throw late, but I thought Trae was good. And then Capela, I kind of made fun of it a little bit. There was a couple of people tweeting about some frustration with Capela. Like, I don't know what you're watching. I think Clint was fantastic in this game. Did have 10 points, 14 rebounds, 2 steals. Did miss the one kind of hilariously bad bunny early in the fourth quarter, but aside from that, he was 5-8 from the floor. I was like, that was a bad ratio. Like, I think he played extremely well. And again, every starter other than TLC was +3 or better in a 10-point loss. So that kind of tells you it's not always that cut and dry in the plus minus, but it really kind of was in this game if you watch the game back and forth. So it happens sometimes, and that's kind of all I have on this particular contest. In the end, a loss that is I don't want to say acceptable, but certainly not one that you will go to your grave lamenting like you have some of these Hawks losses this season. And they had a chance to win it for sure, but in my mind, it would have been a game that they kind of had to steal and didn't play all that well. Obviously, guys played individually pretty well, but the overall output, if the Raptors just shoot the ball even semi-decently, the Hawks probably lose this game by 15. So there you go. We'll leave it there for now. As for the standings, Brooklyn beat Houston in the way that you would expect. Charlotte got killed in Miami, which is notable. And then Cleveland, though, did the Hawks a favor and lost to the tanking Orlando Magic. It was a road game, but still, that's a bad loss for the Cavs, who have been free-falling for a while now. And Cleveland had a good start of the season, but they've been not playing like a playoff team for a while. With all of that said, the Hawks are now in a tie with the Nets for the 8th seed, but if they play, at the end of today, they would be the 9th seed because they lost tiebreaker to the Nets this season. So I believe anyway, unless that's changed in the last couple of moments. Yeah, they're 1-2 against the Nets, so that's not changing. So if the Hawks and Nets are in a 2-way tie, the Hawks lose that 2-way tie. So keep that in mind. But they're a game and a half back of Cleveland for the 7 seed. That's definitely still in play. If the Hawks were to go 3-1, which means 3-0 down the stretch, they would have a chance, in my mind, with the way that Cleveland is playing to get to 7. But they need to start rooting against the Nets even more so, because the Nets will be favored in every game that they play the rest of the way. And the Hawks have the one game in Miami in which they will not be favored on Friday. And also only a half game ahead of Charlotte because the Hornets did lose this game, which is helpful for the Hawks. But honestly, even with 3 games to go, the Hawks could finish 7th or 10th. Or 9th or 8th or 9th. They have the entire spectrum in front of them still, with only 4 or 5 days to go in the season. From here, a quick turnaround for the Hawks, a back-to-back at home against Washington on Wednesday. Number 1, the Wizards have nothing to play for. They have been eliminated. They have nothing to play for, but they went into Minnesota tonight and beat the Wolves by 18 points. So the Wizards are weird. The Hawks will be favored. The Hawks should be favored. The Hawks should win if they play well. But the Wizards have been still trying to some extent, even with nothing to play for. So it's not like a walk-off. It's not like a walkover game for Atlanta at home. Again, the Wizards are also on the back-to-back, so a level playing field, and the Hawks have home court advantage. But obviously dealing with the customs in Toronto and all that stuff. So not a given by any means. And we'll see how the Hawks fare in that spot. But by the way, it's a late tip-off. It's an 8 o'clock game. Keep that in mind. That's a weird start time because of the back-to-back. I think some of that has to do with that back-to-back travel. But an 8 o'clock start, even on a Wednesday, for the Hawks. That's one they have to get, let's just say. If the Hawks want to have any chance to finish 7 or 8, they can't afford to lose to Washington. So that gives them some pressure, to be sure, on Wednesday. And the Nets, by the way, play the Knicks. That's on the road, but on the road means actually just across town. So that's a game the Nets will be favored in. And the smart money right now, if you were to look at the projection systems and the betting odds, I believe with this loss, the Hawks are now projected to be still in a tie with the Nets by 538. But the Hawks have been pretty high at 538's playoff odds the entire way. Most systems are still having the Nets ahead of the Hawks. And by the way, again, if the Hawks and Nets tie, the Hawks lose that two-way tiebreaker. So the Hawks need to beat the Nets if it's a two-way tiebreaker. And given the Nets schedule, that's an uphill battle, especially because the Hawks have to go to Miami on Friday. So all that said, I think if I had to guess right now today, I almost want to say the Hawks have a better chance to finish ahead of the Cavs than the Nets, which sounds crazy because the Cavs are a game and a half ahead of the Hawks. But here's the Cavs' remaining schedule. They have to go to Brooklyn on Friday, and then they end with Milwaukee on Sunday. They have 2 games left. So if the Cavs were to lose those 2 games, which I think right now you have to guess that they probably will, that gives them 43 and 39. That means if the Hawks were to win out, they finished ahead of the Cavs. Or if the Hawks were to go 2-1, they would tie the Cavs. So a lot still in play for the Hawks. Again, I'm sort of rambling now, but the entire gamut is available, and they have to finish strong. One more time as a reminder, Wednesday against Washington at home, Friday against Miami on the road, and then Sunday against the plucky Houston Rockets on an afternoon game. By the way, that's now set. That was announced by the NBA this week. It's going to be a 3:30 tip-off Eastern time on Sunday, so 2:30 Central when they play the Rockets, and that's a game the Hawks will probably need to win. So we'll keep an eye on that in the near future. I'm done rambling for this podcast. I had a very, very long day, so my apologies for any rambling that happened on this pod. I had to drive back from New Orleans, where I had a lot of fun covering the Final Four, some great games, some great experiences there, but drove through some storms and a 10-hour drive and straight into the game. So I am shot, and I appreciate your flexibility and patience with me as a result. But please, please, please subscribe to this podcast on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, Google Podcasts, and also on YouTube. We are trying to get to 1,000 subscribers in the near future on YouTube. Even if you're not going to plan to watch a ton of YouTube podcasts, it really helps us to subscribe. So I know that's not for everybody, but even if you're an iPhone person or an Android person, you want to listen to the show while you're walking or whatever, one click on the subscribe button on YouTube channel will definitely help us, as well as your audio stuff. If you want to support the show, also leave 5-star ratings and reviews and all that fun stuff. Follow me on Twitter at BT Rowland. Follow the show on Twitter at Locked on Hawks. We'll be back again after the game on Wednesday with another episode, and we'll see you next time.